Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hit and Hustle from IRSportsDaily.com. I'm your host, Greg Flammang. Jamie is a little bit late right now, but I wanted to get started. I didn't want to get started too late for everybody because he's going to be here to talk about the defensive line. But there was some news that we should probably hit on to start the show. And before we get going, I just want everyone to get over to the our YouTube channel that you're on right now. Hit the subscribe button. There's a lot of new shows coming out. Yesterday, Mike Frank and Christian McCollum did a really good show on the 2024 wide receiver class that is brewing right now, including a player from Anthony Robinson from Long Beach Poly, who's in my neighborhood. So I'm gonna have to check him out during the fall season. Supposed to be on campus for the big barbecue on July 26th. So, or that weekend. But the news of the day before we get going on the defensive line preview is the foot injury, the fifth metatarsal broken foot to tight end Mitchell Evans, who was scheduled to be probably Notre Dame's number 2 tight end, right after Michael Mayer, and he was going to be a key player. He played a lot as a freshman last year. A lot of it was in kind of by necessity, right, due to injuries to Kevin Ballman. Kane Barong tore his ACL in the Virginia Tech game. Mitchell Evans played a lot in the Virginia Tech game, but unfortunately he was ejected for a targeting penalty that was pretty dubious, right? So, but he was making strides, had a good spring game. People were very excited about him, and now he goes down with a broken foot. And this is something that Jamie's talked about before on the show regarding broken feet for a Notre Dame football player, right? We've seen it a few times. Joe Wilkins broke his foot in the spring. Jarrett Patterson had a Liz Frank injury. Obviously, famously, Kevin Austin had a broken foot. We've seen, this type of injury come up within the basketball program. And Jamie's talked about how, his wife is in sports medicine, and she went to a conference where the speaker highlighted the fact that they have seen this more prevalently in situations where the athletes wearing Under Armour foot gear, and look, I am not that doctor and I don't have him on the show, but it keeps happening and it keeps becoming a problem. And I think that Notre Dame needs to look into this, right? You can't simply ignore the fact that Notre Dame athletes continue to break their feet in non-competitive situations, right? I mean, Kevin Austin broke his foot. I think it was late July in a 2020 during workouts. Mitchell Evans breaks his foot in mid-July during workouts, and so that's another player. That's another player that's down, right? So Kevin Austin broke his foot mid-July. So like we said, mid-July, he tried to come back. It was like September, but this was without surgery. He ended up breaking again, which I think everyone kind of predicted what happened because he didn't have surgery, and that's only a matter of time. And Mitchell Evans has had the surgery done. And that's just, so Mitchell Evans had his surgery, and hopefully he'll be back, mid-October, sometime around there, maybe a little bit before that. But, like we talked about with Joe Wilkins, anytime you have a player who is now off his feet and is not going to be able to run around, he's not going to be able to properly weight train, he's not going to be able to weight train lower body, that's gonna take a toll. And to ramp him up in the middle of the year when the team has already played a few games, it's not a good situation, and it's not a good it doesn't bode well for Mitchell Evans having a very high impact on the season for Notre Dame in 2022. But hopefully, we can, Notre Dame can, get him back. And, there's no guarantee, of course, that he won't have a big impact on the team. But, as far as the Under Armour thing, I do think Notre Dame needs to look into it seriously. because it's obviously created a bunch of problems for Notre Dame, and we're going to have to see, um, where things are going forward. I'm obviously a big fan of Nike myself. Notre Dame is. It seems like that's a move that they've been reluctant to make, that they don't want to make. I know that Nike and specifically Jordan Brand have made overtures towards overtures towards the football program, but Notre Dame I think is happy with Under Armour thus far, and so that's where it is right now. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the defensive line preview. I am wondering at this moment right now, because Jamie is not here. So he told me noon. And Jamie is usually on the East Coast. So when he says noon, I take that to mean 9 East or 9 Pacific time. But he's been on the West Coast, and maybe he is still on the West Coast. So maybe he thinks we're recording 3 hours from now, which would be unfortunate mistake on my part. That would be a miscommunication. But it's okay. I can plow forward. I would say keep the comments coming, because I've needed that's what I'll need for a live show here. We'll get started with John Murray. I expect the D-line to be stout, aggressive, and create havoc. Can't wait to see it happen. I think I have a similar view of that. Notre Dame 2164 will be a backbone of our team. Jay Chillen just came from the Cover 3 podcast, so I appreciate you joining the show for that. You've been making a bunch of comments so far, which I really appreciate. And then David Solomon, Riley Mills will be key. If he can be a big, legit offense, cause offense problems, the defense could be special. I agree with that. So let's get into it. So let's get into where Notre Dame has been, where Notre Dame was recently, and where where they need to make strides from last season's team. So I've got this up from Football Outsiders here, and here's Notre Dame, and Football Outsiders does a really good job of click this off. There we go. So basically stats and numbers that aren't really just like counting stats, basically, right? So we're looking at line yards. So average line yards is kind of like the opposite for the offense, right? So it's the first 2 or 3 yards. How do they do at the point of attack, basically? And last year Notre Dame was 63rd against the run, 69th on standard downs, 71st on passing downs. So you could get run on if you were Notre Dame last year. And that kind of showed in the yards per carry number, where there's another on collegefootballstats.com. I was looking at the yards per carry numbers, and Notre Dame was, I believe, 46th. Yeah, they were 46th nationally at 3.86 yards per carry. And that what Notre Dame had a similar. This is where Notre Dame has been historically, right? So historically, Notre Dame has been right around this number. So the 2018 team, which that 2018 defensive line that everyone remembers, that was one of the strengths of that team that propelled Notre Dame into the college football playoff. They were at 3.84 yards per attempt against, right? And then obviously the 2012 program, I'll just give them a look right now. They were 16th nationally at 3.47, right? And obviously the 2012 team was very good. And so, that's kind of the standard, right? Especially as a run defense, right? So, when you're looking at the type of team that Notre Dame wants to have, they want to improve on the defensive line in terms of stopping the run. But then when you look at when you look at their pass rush, one more point for the run defense, the power success rate from basically teams are in a short yardage type situation. They only need a couple yards, and they're going heavy against Notre Dame. They were 95th nationally, right? It's not the best, um, not the best there against the run, especially in short yardage. But do you see here, and this is something that Jamie talks about a lot as far as stuff rate. So stuff rate is basically how many times there's a running play and Notre Dame stops them for either like a 1 yard gain, 0 yard gain, or a negative gain. They were 39th, right? And I think that number was much higher to start the year. And as the year wore on, that number got lower and lower, or they started to drop in the rankings more and more. But um, that was a strength, and then it became kind of a weakness as the season wore on. Not a weakness, but less of a strength as the season wore on. So that's something that they're going to want to get better at. The pass rush numbers were much better, right? So 33rd in sack rate, 23rd in standard down sack rate, and 30th in passing down sack rate. So they were a better pass rushing team last year than they were against the run, and that makes sense, right? So when you have someone like Isaiah Foskey, who was double-digit sacks and is set to break the Notre Dame record for career sacks. You had MTA, who did a really good job. You had Riley Mills had a really big game against Virginia. So they had players last year who could get after the quarterback, and Marcus Freeman did a really good job of dialing up blitzes and that sort of thing with Bull Bauer. So that's something that they are going to want to improve on. And so that is kind of where Notre Dame was last year. And so we will get into this season with the preview of what we expect, right? So let's look at the stars, right? So Notre Dame has, I'm going to include Isaiah Foskey in this, obviously, and I'm going to include Jason Ademilola as a star in this as well, because he's not going to have the preseason recognition of someone like Isaiah Foskey, of course. He's not going to be the projected high draft pick that Isaiah Foskey might, right? As like a first rounder, second rounder, that sort of thing. But within the college game, right? Like if you look at someone like Sheldon Day, who I kind of compare him to, at least of caliber of player, if you compare him to Sheldon Day, then I think we would all consider Sheldon Day to have been a star performer, especially on the 2015 team, right? With like almost 20 tackles for loss, sacks included, just creating tons of havoc all the time in the backfield all the time, like creating a lot of problems for offenses. Like I would consider Sheldon Day a star in that sense. And I think that Jason Ademilola could be that type of player for Notre Dame. Right. And that's kind of what I expect. I think that's his ability. And I think that's that's where he can be as a defensive player. So you look at Foskey, you look at Ademilola, like how big of stars can they be, right? And if you're on Twitter, you see a lot of chatter about Isaiah Foskey, from like Todd McShay was doing something on him. There's yesterday talking about how good of a pass rusher he is. There's another Twitter follow, Matt Alkier, who did a long thread with all 22 footage of Isaiah Foskey. Jamie did something on Isaiah Foskey earlier in the offseason, just talking about the variety of ways that he can impact the team. We're talking about a player who could be a top 10 pick, right? And that's a projection, right? And that's obviously the high end of where he is, but he has the physical ability, he has the talent, he has the experience, right? Last year he was such a he was such a kind of like a new player, right? And this was the first time that he was actually like a full-time player, and he went in there and he did it, and he played great. So there's that aspect of it for Isaiah Foskey. And I think Jason Ademilola, same thing, right? I think if you can keep him on the field, I think he can very easily have a Sheldon Day type of season for Notre Dame, where he's up there 15, 16, 17 tackles for loss. Hopefully he doesn't have to, and the numbers for him, the raw numbers might be hurt from the standpoint of he doesn't have to be on the field for as many snaps as Sheldon Day was. I think that was a big problem for him, at times, right? And for that defense as a whole, like they didn't have the depth that Notre Dame has now. And so you look at those two guys and you think, like, I always think you're only going to be as good as your stars, right? You can have solid play, right? And we'll get into kind of the complementary pieces, in a bit. But when you have two stars like this, when you have Isaiah Foskey, if those guys, Isaiah Foskey and Jason Admiral, if those guys aren't playing at a star level, then the ceiling for how good your defense can only be so high, because they are the ones that can cause so many problems for an offensive line, that just their presence can elevate the rest of the unit. And that's what Notre Dame needs, right? And so it's similar thing on the offensive line, right? We can talk about, on the offensive line, you can talk about, Jarrett Patterson, and you can talk about Josh Lugg and Kristofic and Carell and how good those guys can be. And that's a useful conversation. And when we get to that, that's what we'll do. But if Blake Fisher and Joe Alt are not going to be stars, and I think Notre Dame needs them to be stars, if they're not going to be stars, then the line can only be so good. And I think the same is true on defense, right? And so that's kind of how I view it. So that's going to be a big thing, and I think I really do think that Isaiah Foskey is going to take the next step. I do. I don't know how big that step is going to be, but I think he's going to be like Justin Tuck level 2004 type, because of, it's not just him, right? There is Jason Adamilola, and we can't forget, when discussing how Isaiah Foskey is going to play, we do need to factor in that Maris Luafau is now going to be blitzing to his side and blitzing to, not allowing the offensive line to completely solely focus on Isaiah Foskey. And I think that is a big part of where his ceiling is and where things can go for him. So I just want to bring up, hey y'all, Notre Dame for life. Hello, appreciate it. There's been some lively discussion in the chat so far that I really appreciate. And so let's see, David Riley. Botelho. Oh, agree, David Riley. Riley Mills. Botelho could take us to elite level. All right, so let's get into the complementary pieces, right? So let's get into guys like Riley Mills, because he is someone who has a ton of expectations on him. He's projected to play the big end position, so basically MTA's spot. And I think the wild cards for this defensive line there's four, in my opinion, right? So there's Riley Mills, there is Justin Adamilola, who is the backup Viper to Isaiah Foskey, but he can play kind of all over the defense, right? Like, I think he is a swing player, and that he has the type of skill set that not just Al Washington, but I believe that Al Golden can really come up with different ways to use him, because he's not like a prototypical big end. He's not a prototypical Viper, but whenever he's on the field, he's been productive. And I think his play last year was a big reason why Jordan Botelho had such a tough time getting on the field at the Viper position, because Justin Adamilola is a productive player, just period. He has always been productive at Notre Dame. You put him on the field and he makes plays. He's around the ball. He's doing the things that he's supposed to do. Now, granted, he's not perfect, of course, and he doesn't have the upside as someone as Isaiah Foskey, but he is a chess piece that can be moved around. And I think he's going to be a big part of the defensive line this year. And I think that, especially knowing like this is his last year with his brother, it may not be his last year at Notre Dame, but it's his last year with his brother for sure. And I think that is probably going to spur both of them on. So you look at him and what he can do. I think that you look at Howard Cross and Jacob Lacey inside. Those two. This is a huge year, right? And I know Jacob Lacey. He won one of the workout awards, like Workout Warrior of the Week. So I think he senses that this is a time for him, right? There's no one in front, right? There's no Kurt Heinisch. There's no There's no MTA, right? Like there's no Kurt Heinisch there. There's no natural kind of upperclassman that's ahead of him. I think he knows this is my time, and this is the time for me to make a big role, to have a big role in the defense. And so let's see, we have Howard Cross again, consistent. It's almost similar to Justin Adamalola in that not the prototypical size, not the prototypical kind of just bulk, like length. He doesn't have that, right? He doesn't have the physical traits that you say, oh, this is an elite football player, but he knows how to play the game. He's always been good with his hands. He's always been good off the snap. He knows how to use leverage. He knows how to use his hands in terms of like swim moves and that sort of thing. He has heavy hands. Jamie's talked about that a ton. The last, kind of few years, or a couple years, I should say. And so, whenever he's been in the game, it's been a productive thing, right? Unless he gets worn down, which, we saw a little bit last year again. And I think, but now that this will be his third year in the program, I think physically this will be the best we've ever seen him. And I think, again, there's no upperclassman in front of him where it's like you say, okay, like this is where like this person is going to eat into your snaps. I think he knows he's going to get the snaps, and I think he's going to be a big playmaker. And then you look at Riley Mills here, where I mean, could be a huge season, right? Like this is the coming out party of the coming out parties. Could be if for anyone on this defense, and especially the defensive line, it could be from Riley Mills, because there's going to be a ton of focus on Isaiah Foskey. There's going to be a ton of focus on Jason Adamalola, and then you're going to have to worry about obviously the Howard Crosses, and you're going to have to worry about the Maris Luafau's blitzing, right? And not just Maris Luafau, right? So you have the rover position, you have the type of exotic looks that Al Golden can bring, right? And that's part of his allure, right? I mean, you come from a system where you come from a system where you're in the NFL, and you're not just bland sending for the kind of the normal way, or you're not just sending 5, right? Like he knows how to disguise blitzes. He knows how to bring players from positions that the offense isn't expecting. And all this confusion means that you're going to get someone like Riley Mills in favorable matchups. And he's going to have favorable matchups regardless, because of the other players on the other side of the defense. And that is a situation where, Notre Dame was put in that situation a ton last year, especially when he played against Virginia and he had a huge game, right? There's like multiple sacks, multiple pressures. And that's what happens when you get a player up against inferior competition, and they're allowed to just kind of eat, right? They're allowed to use their advantage in a situation where the team is looking at someone else, right? And I think that's where Riley Mills can really make a big difference. And I think that, again, he knows. And I think it's such a big difference for a player. Like I keep bringing that up, right? The fact that, these guys know that they don't have someone in front of them. And I think that's a huge thing for a young player, especially, to know that the path is clear. And it's not about not wanting competition. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the realization that it's up to you now, right? Like if you're sitting behind someone like MTA and you're Riley Mills, right? You don't have the type of urgency, not even, and this is just human nature, right? Like it says nothing about Riley Mills, the person, or anything like that, or like anyone else, like Howard Cross or Jacob Lacey or anything. It's that when you have someone like MTA in front of you, or you have someone like Kurt Heinisch in front of you, okay, like it's not completely necessary for me to be kind of a great player, because it's up to those, like, those are captains, right? Like, those are the captains of the team. It's their responsibility. I just need to become a better player myself, and there's not the urgency though. And we saw this with Isaiah Foskey, right? He was behind players at the Viper position in 2020, right? And he was a good player, right? But he wasn't a great player. Like, you saw flashes from him, but then you you give him opportunity to get all the snaps last year with no one in front of him, and he took the next step. And I think that is the type of thing that you could see, not just from Riley Mills, but you could see that from Howard Cross. You could see that from Jacob Lacey as well, right? If those three guys just have the light bulb turn on, and you combine that with Jason Adamilola, when you combine that with um, um, Jacob Lacey and Howard Cross, that's when you're really cooking with gas, right? That's when you're really starting to see like what the defensive line can be. And so that as a kind of a quintet, those five between Foskey, Justin Adamalola, Jacob Lacey, Howard Cross, Riley Mills, I think that's the foundation for a very, very strong kind of first five defensive line. And then we'll kind of make the transition here into the depth and what that can look like. And I'm going to start with Nana Osafo-Mensah, right? And Osafo-Mensah is to me on the strong side, right? So he'd be backing up Riley Mills. I think for him, it's a similar situation where the urgency is heightened because he knows now he's not just going to be a guy who gets the 10 snaps a game or 15 snaps a game. He's going to be due for 20 snaps a game, 25 maybe, right? And that's a real, like, you're talking about a real contribution to the team where it's like I am locked in on meetings. I am locked in at practice because I know I'm going to have a major role in this team week after week after week. It's not just, the spot situation it's not just a spot situation against Purdue or Toledo or something like that. Like, oh, I made a big play against Toledo, or I made a big play against Purdue. I ate some snaps against Wisconsin, right? We're talking about week after week after week where you are counted on to be a significant contributor. Like, I think that makes a really big deal for someone like Nana. And we know that his body is getting a lot better, right? These guys that are in the third, coming up on the third year of Bayless, especially on the inside, like that's where you really start to see the physical growth, right? And that's when it starts to make a big difference. And that includes someone like Gabriel Rubio, who was on the inside. I think had a tough time early in his career, especially as a freshman. And now, he was a top 150 caliber recruit. He was a one, he was highly sought after. And then I think physically it was a little bit difficult for him. And I think the learning curve was a little bit steeper than maybe people, thought it might be. But, he had a good spring game. He showed a good motor in the spring game. I think that people were excited about the way that he played in the spring game and the way that he, performed in terms of, getting into the backfield and being active, right? And so he's someone that needs to provide, that little bit of depth, right, inside. And I think this is the year where it's like, okay, you're going to be a part of the rotation. He's going to be in the kind of like the Nana Osafo-Mensah, in my opinion, where it's like, okay, you're going to get maybe 10 to 15, maybe 20 snaps a game, but those need to be quality snaps. And I think he can bring that. And I think that's where his role is going to be. And I think that's a good start for him. And I think that's something that's kind of appropriate for someone who hasn't been a player, heavy rotation player from Notre Dame. Get into the rotation, get into, you're going to be a college football player and you're going to help us out. Just try to win. So that's something to look for from Gabriel Rubio. Should mention the grad transfer from Harvard. Um, yeah, Jamie just texted me. He thought it was Pacific time, so hopefully he can pop in here because I'm uh, I'm uh, I'm hanging in there on his position. I did this whole thing. We did defensive line first because it's Jamie's baby, and now he's not here. So hopefully he can pop in. If he can't, then we'll have to I'll have to make it up to him somehow. But yeah, so talking about Chris Smith, right? The grad transfer from Harvard. This is someone that I think is going to help them. Maybe even across the two positions, right? Like maybe even a little bit of three tech, maybe a little bit of definitely at nose, right? So definitely at the one. He can get in front of people, and he can cause problems. I mean, he was a playmaker at Harvard, right? This is someone who has that man strength that you're looking for, right? Like, so maybe Gabriel Rubio doesn't have. I think that this is like Chris Smith. I think he definitely does have that. I think he knows how to play in the trenches. Now, granted, it's a lower level of football, but I think it's important to remember that he's not being counted on to take on, you know, uh 40, 50 snaps in a game, right? Like it's not going to be like that. It's going to be like 20, 25 snaps, right? Where the reps that you take, they're not going to be plentiful, but they got to be they got to be quality. And that's what you're looking for from Chris Smith, right? And I think that he's going to be a solid contributor. So when you look at, so we have the first five from Notre Dame, right? So you look at the first five, you look at um, Adamalola, Foskey, Adamalola, or yeah, Justin. Yeah, I'm lost my train of thought for a second. Okay, so Foskey, Adamalola times two, Riley Mills, and Howard Cross, Jacob Lacey. So I think those are the first five that you're looking at, and then you go into Nana Safamensa, you go into Gabe Rubio, and you go into Chris Smith. I think that's 7 or 8 deep that you can confidently play. Know you're going to get good snaps out of those guys. I've seen a bunch of people talking about Ayana Aina, or Aiden, I should say, and it's tough, right? Like losing him to the ACL was very difficult. Because he was that big body, and I think that he was really coming into a role for Notre Dame, and it's a tough one, but it's something that he's going to have to rebound from, and so that's difficult. I see a bunch of people talking about Patelho, so let's put that up. I love getting Patelho on the field more often. From Justin Knox, I think Patelho is pretty set on Rover right now. I think he's going to be behind. I think he's going to be behind Jack Kaiser. I think that's where he's going to be, and I think that what will help him is that Jack Kaiser is such a good athlete that he can be all over the place. And Patelho is another type of athlete that he's someone that I think Al Golden can create a role for. I think that Al Golden can, I think that, we've seen Al Golden blitz the safeties a bunch, and this is something that Jamie's talked about. And I think that obviously Patelho was not a safety, but he's an athlete, and he's an athlete where it's just like, you know what, create something where he's putting pressure on the quarterback. And I think that is going to be his role this year. He might have a niche role. He might have a, maybe not like the set. Like I could see him getting like 25, 30 snaps this year. But maybe not at like Rover. Like, I don't know. It'll be a position that like almost doesn't even have a name, right? He'll just be kind of out there doing things. And it's like basically a creative position to be creating havoc within the passing game, within the running game. I think that's the that's the benefit of having Al Golden, right? Where in the NFL they have players and it's like, let me create a role for him, and that's something that happens all the time in the league. So I think that's something that is to be considered for Jordan Botelho. Justin Knox, who is Mills comp? Riley Hutchinson. Man, I don't know if he's that kind of an athlete, right? I'm just like, think about who his comp is. Like I just I don't see him as that type of, like truly off the edge, like turning the corner kind of guy. Like not as twitchy, right? Like Aiden Hutchinson, like he ran a slow 40, I think, for what he expected to, but it was still like 4.7. Like if Riley Mills is a 4.7 guy, then Notre Dame is really onto something, right? Because then you can definitely turn the corner. You can get down and bend, and you can create problems there. But yeah, I don't see that from Riley Mills. Who is his comp? I don't know. Someone put it in the chat. Someone let's get some we got a bunch of people watching right now. Let's everyone in the chat put up your comp for Riley Mills. Let's see if we can come up with one that we all kind of agree on. 34, 31 and 34 look good in the spring game. So you're talking about 31 is Nana Mensa, 34 Osita Kwanu. I think Osita is one where I think definitely fits the physical bill, right? He looks good. Like he's a first guy off the bus kind of guy, right? Like he's ripped. He's kind of in the Jordan Botelho camp where it's like a tweener, right? You don't know, is he big enough to be a Viper? Is he athletic enough? Because he had I think it was an Achilles injury, tore his Achilles last year, and so is he athletic enough now to play kind of in space somewhere? And that's kind of an open question, right? I think Notre Dame likes him. They put him out there as the as they'd given him some reps at running back, right? Because of some injuries, and so they like him as a football player. Can he make a difference, right? And then there's Jason Onye, again, who was more of a project guy. He came in. I think people saw him as an end, and now he's grown into like a 300-pounder. Like, what can he give them in the on the inside, right? As a 3 tech. I don't know that he'll ever be a 1 tech, but I mean, who knows, right? Like he's close to 300 pounds now. So what can he give them, right? I think that he's now playing a position that they didn't necessarily project initially. I know we heard some good things about him from the spring, but you're going from not being a part of the rotation to we're asking, can he be a part of can he eat snaps for Notre Dame and give them quality snaps in a football game? Like maybe against the UNLVs and the Marshalls and that sort of thing, right? Like just take snaps that gives guys rest, that doesn't give them the wear and tear like you would see, like we saw, a few years ago, right? Like 2016, 2015, 2017, where guys, you just couldn't take them off the field. And so that's the kind of like, as a depth player, can he develop quick enough to where he can make a difference there? And then you look at the freshmen, right? So Aiden Gobira, Viper for right now. I think you also have like Viper, maybe strong end, right? Because the other thing is now I think Joshua Burnham is definitely working with the Viper at this point, because we've seen him in a couple of video or a couple photos where he's been basically hanging around with the defensive line. I think there was a defensive line photo that Al Washington put out, and Josh Burnham was with that group. So I think he's a Viper now. Probably going to need a year, right? Like he's going to need a year behind, behind Foskey and Justin Adamalola, and special teams player probably. Aiden Gobira, maybe the same thing, right? Maybe he can get into a game, right? Like maybe get into Marshall or UNLV or a blowout somewhere else where it's like you just get him snaps, get him into the game. I think there's no way that Josh Burnham isn't on special teams somewhere, either covering kicks or blocking on punt or on kickoff return. So that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, so there's a lot of there's a lot of development that those guys need to have. But look, this is the good part about having a deep defensive line, right? In a defensive line group that is ready to go, right? And multiple layers of guys who are ready to go, because you don't want to have to throw Aiden Gobira out there. You don't want to have to throw Josh Burnham out there. Now, granted, if you see them in a game, they will have had to beat out guys like Justin Adamilola and Riley Mills and Osita Ekwonu for snaps, right? Not Osita Ekwonu, Nano Asafo-Mensah. If you can beat out those guys for snaps, then look, you're a good football player and you're ready to go, right? And that's where Notre Dame is on the defensive line. If a young player plays, same thing with Tyson Ford, right? I know that he was when he came in, I think that people were surprised at how good he was and how developed he was, right? And he's another one who's going to be at the strong end, right? Or he's going to move inside eventually, but I think now he's at the strong end. If those guys find a way to get onto the field and make and be contributors, and you're beating out they're beating out guys like Nano Asafo-Mensah for snaps. If they want to say like, okay, like we're gonna take some snaps away from Justin Adamilola, we're gonna give them to Josh Burnham or Aiden Gobira or something. You're a quality football player, and that's what you want to be in. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to play them. It's like if they earn it, they earn it. I just want to put up this from James Lawrence Zensi. I don't burn a year of Burnham's eligibility. Here's the thing, that you get 4 games. So there's that, right? In my opinion, first of all, if they do burn, I mean, if they burn his eligibility, it won't be for 5. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to have him be in 5 games. It would be a situation where, no, he's going to play like all 12, 13 for us, right? So if you have a guy who's contributing in every single game, then it's okay, right? If not, then it's like he has 4 games he can play in, right? And I think they'll put him in games. But I agree, if he's not like a significant contributor to them, and even if honestly, if it's just on special teams or something like that, then like Justin says here, I don't think they need to. I don't think they need to either. You don't have to do it. But that kind of has more to do with the staff's kind of their communications with him, right? What are they talking about with him? Where do they think he's going to be? Like, if they don't think he's a 5-year player, then get him out there and have him making plays, right? Regardless, even if it's just on special teams. Like, if they know, like, hey, this guy, he's not playing a lot this year, but he's going to start for us somewhere. He's going to start for us somewhere, and as a sophomore, he's not going to be around for 4 more years. Like, there's just no way, right? So I whatever. If they feel like he can play and contribute in all 12, then go for it, right? Because then he probably won't be a 5-year player. So, Jay Chillen, Riley Mills comp Derek Landry. Don't hate it. Don't hate it. I think Derek Landry, he did take snaps at defensive end for sure at times. More of an inside player. I think Riley Mills is longer. I think their athletic profile is a little bit different. I'd have to go back and look. Yeah, Justin, that's who he's talking about. He's talking about Derek Landry. Derek Landry, that's funny. Yeah, I feel like Riley Mills is longer than that. I mean, maybe like Ronaldo Wynn, right? It's from a while ago. Ronaldo Wynn was a guy who was like, he was smaller. I'm gonna go with that. I think Ronaldo win because I don't view Win as like some terrific athlete or anything. I know that he was physically just a monster. Um, and he was so powerful, athletic enough off the edge, right? But he was so powerful that he could just bully guys. And he ended up being a top first round pick. I think he was late in the first round. This was like 1999 or 98 or whatever it was. But yeah, I that's what I would say. Like edge player, not super twitchy, not super like you know, not super like athletic bendy guy, but just like a beast, like just a physical beast. Um, let's see, who am I forgetting? I should have brought up Alex Ahrensberger as well. I know that he's had a really good off season. Similar to Jacob Lacey, he won the Workout Warrior weekly award that they give out for that sort of thing. So I think he's another wild card, right? Like, can he catch lightning in a bottle? Can he figure it out, right? Like this was a projection that Mike Elston made, right? And look at um, we have lofty goals, Jay Chillin. We have lofty goals out here. Okay, we don't. That's what I'm going with. Look, Derek Landry. Derek Landry was a fourth round pick, I think, third, fourth round pick. So that's what I'm going with. I'm going with Ronaldo win. I'm in a good mood about that. So that's where we are with that. So yeah, Errol Sandersberger, can he catch that lightning in the bottle? Can he become what Mike Elston thought, right? And Mike Elston took maybe too many projects, but he did have a good eye for it. Let's give him that credit. He had a good eye for it. And could Alex Ahrensberger turn the corner, right? Can the light come on and and become like just an edge guy, right? You put him in a pass rush situation and he is like in the backfield, unblockable, right? Like similar type situation where it's like, hey, everyone's concerned about it could like let's say you have a situation where you have Isaiah Foskey on the right, edge rusher. You have Jason Adamilola inside. Maybe they move Riley Mills inside for this type of situation, and then you bring in Alex Ahrensberger off the edge. Maybe that's a role that he can thrive in, right? No one's worried about him. You might even put a back on him or a tight end, right? Because you're moving the offensive line towards the other players. So let's see. Let's AJ Espinosa. I think that was the guy from Iowa. Not bad. Don't hate it. Let's go for that. I enjoy that. I think he was a top pick, right? I'm not as plugged into Iowa football as I'd like to be, but that'd be good. So that's kind of the preview there for the defensive line. I think let's look big picture. You know, Jamie, I know Jamie is super high on this entire defense as a whole, and I think if you look at Isaiah Foskey, if he takes the next step, you're talking about one. I mean, one of the elite defensive lines like in the nation. Because when you can rush the passer like that, because he's already at 11 sacks last year, strip sacker to extraordinaire. That's what Todd McShay was bringing up at how good he was at strip sacks, and and when you can do that, you have a player like that, then that elevates obviously everybody else. I think having Jason Adamilola inside, I think that's a huge one in terms of A, experience, B, production, C, just like that. Like, look, I don't know. We can get into captains later. I don't know if they'll give him the C on the jersey, but for all intents and purposes, he'll be a captain, right? This is his last year. He didn't have to come back. He did. And when you don't have to come back, and you definitely are taking ownership of the team. And so I think that, the upside from those two guys is huge. I think you have a ton of depth behind that. I think Riley Mills is set to ascend. I think that you're going to see that from Jacob Lacey. I think you're going to see that from Howard Cross. I think you're going to get quality reps from Chris Smith, and you're going to get quality reps from Nana Osafo-Mensah. And then after that, you have a bunch of wild cards. You have so many players where it's like, Gabe Rubio or Alex Ahrensberger, where you look at just maybe one or two of them becomes a hit. And then you have 8, 9 deep on the defensive line. You can make wholesale changes. And then that's when you're really cooking with fire there. And that's how you become like a great that's how you become like a great defensive line and a strength of the defense. And I think it's just a big compliment to, when we talk about the linebackers, you know, that the two units are going to complement each other very well. I think the defensive line is going to create openings for the linebackers, and I think the linebackers are in turn going to create opportunities for the defensive line. I want to bring up this point from James Lawrence Zensi. We have a great front seven depth. If the secondary develops, it can be an elite defense. Great depth with a pair of fifth-year senior backup safeties. Just comes down to corners. Look, I think everyone is quite happy with Cam Hart, right? I think people are very excited about him, and I think what he can be next year. I think that, Jaden Mickey is coming on like wildfire, right? He's been, and look, if nothing else, he is really going to press Tariq Bracy and Clarence Lewis to play the best football they've played in their career, because you have a young guy who is recruited by this staff who is a competitor and is putting up good numbers and workouts and that sort of thing. I've seen some things where he might be the fastest corner. I've seen some evidence of that. So, that they're going to be on their horse, right? There's the urgency for them has never been higher. This, I'm not going to stand for this. If Henderson starts at safety, we're in trouble. Ramon Henderson's a good player. I'm not standing for it. We're not going to bring in safety slander on the defensive line podcast. Ramon Henderson's a good player. He's going to play good football next year, and that is my prediction. He played good football last year, right? We're not doing that. We're not going to take shots at Ramon Henderson in my presence. Let's see. Would you say we're more like the Tuitt D line or the Cameron Lewis Moore type of D line? I'm trying to understand. I want to make sure I know what you mean by that. I mean, I don't know. I think that Howard Cross, in terms of star power, so you had Tuitt. The problem is like, so the 20. I mean, if you're talking about like in terms of star power, I mean, it's hard because Foskey could be better than Tuitt now. Foskey could be higher than that. And I think Jason Adamilola, just thinking like he could be a Cameron Lewis Moore type, I guess. I don't see them as different players. Like, I'd see Jason Adamilola as a bit more athletic, explosive. I think Cap was a little bit more powerful, but I think in that sense, they're getting the job done the same. So I guess in terms of production and quality, maybe that's similar. I think Foskey, but then I don't know, like there's no, I don't expect Jacob Lacey to be as good as Lewis Nix. Like that's not a reasonable expectation. Um, so that's kind of how I view it. So I guess it's a mix, right? Like I don't think that I think the top two guys on Notre Dame might be better than the top two on the 2012 team. But the third guy is definitely like Lou Nix. Like I think he was definitely above anyone else. But like there's no like I think Riley Mills could be, whatever you want to say Prince Shembo was, right? Like that was kind of a different defensive line. I think Riley Mills could be that for sure. Um, there's no who's the Justin Adamalola. I mean, Justin Adamalola to me is like Prince Shembo, right? And he's kind of the fifth guy. So that I think this 2012 team has the upside to be a little bit better. They just don't have that Lewis Nix, right? And that's a big difference. But yeah. Um, Pops continues to slander. I am a long strider myself. Okay, and don't tell me that you don't want me to be a defensive back, right? I don't think that's true. I totally disagree with that. All right, okay. First of all, let's look at it. Okay, Robert Blanton, long strider. Bennett Jackson, long strider. Okay, these are the long strider type. Kyle Hamilton was a long strider, so I don't I don't disagree with the take. I mean I don't agree with the take, and I'm not taking that. I will take this from Pops. Justin is better than Prince. Prince Prince Jimbo is a pretty good player, but I do think that they are at least comparable, right? And so I think it's not bad. It's not bad. I think at least they're close. Um, Pops, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. Just don't slander the guys. Okay, don't do it. Okay, I like my safeties. Okay, well, Pops, we have Joseph, Henderson, Brown, and Griffith to choose from. Great depth, regardless. I also think can develop into a good safety. Agree with all of that. Agree. I think the depth is I think the depth is good. I can't recall the last time the safety depth was this solid. I agree with that. In terms of depth, right? Like, and it's interesting to me. I just don't, we don't know. We truly don't know the ceiling of what Brandon Joseph is, right? And I think the 2021 season has shaped what the way we think of him. His 2020 was phenomenal in terms of production and all those things. It was great. The 2021 season, it fell off a good amount. And does that have to do with the defense? Like he said, it was kind of tough to he said it was tough to be a part of a defense that wasn't so good, and they didn't necessarily believe in the coaching and that sort of thing. So um it's that's tough to kind of to gauge, right? He could be a really good player. Like look, he doesn't have the upside of Kyle Hamilton, right? I don't think anyone should expect that, but like if okay, so Kyle Hamilton is like top 15 draft pick, right? Is can Brandon Joseph be like I don't know, a late first caliber player? Can he be a early second caliber player, right? Who knows? And if that's what we're dealing with, that's a really good football player, right? I mean, you're talking I mean, the only safeties at Notre Dame to get drafted higher than that would be Harrison Smith and Kyle Hamilton, right? So that would be a huge upgrade there. Of course, the defensive line preview got hijacked by my safety talk. So let's see. Adam Alola, Cross, Lacey all need to be physical and fast. Ohio State has one of those O lines that average 335 across the board. That's fine. I don't know. They lost Nicholas Pettit Frere, who I don't think was as good as people thought he might be coming out of high school. I'm just like Notre Dame needs to win that matchup. We'll get into the Ohio State thing, but Notre Dame needs to win that matchup pretty handily, and I think they can. Right, I absolutely think they can. At Ohio State they got a new offensive line coach, and they got a new offensive line coach because they weren't very good last year. and they don't have they don't have Blake Fisher and Joe Alt. Like, they didn't have the injuries that Notre Dame had last year that would kind of tell the story about why they weren't, they had a tough time at times. They got beaten up. They got beaten up by Michigan, and they got beaten up by Oregon. And Oregon didn't have their like top two defensive players. Didn't have Kayvon Thibodeau. Didn't have the Sewell, the middle linebacker. They didn't have him, and Oregon beat him up, right? So it's happened before. I think everyone is rightfully concerned about Ohio State's passing game, which, look, everyone should be, right? At one of the best passing games in the nation, if not the best, right? But Ohio State has lost games the exact way that Notre Dame wants to play. Notre Dame wants to play the game like Oregon did. Notre Dame wants to play the game like Michigan did. And it's not like, it's not like Notre Dame is Purdue playing with the passing and all that other stuff, right? And not a physical program like that. Notre Dame is not that. And I don't know why people don't I don't know why they don't view Notre Dame's advantages on the offensive defensive lines as similar to Ohio State's advantages at skill positions, right? And so to me, it's just kind of like it's only being seen one way, and what if it's the other way? So that's what I would say. Last great defensive team. I don't know. I mean, maybe 2017. I mean, I haven't. It's long ago to the fact that I don't really remember it. Like, I haven't followed Ohio State that closely because Notre Dame hasn't really had to play them. So it hasn't been something that I always kind of assume. I know they always have good players, but in terms of production, I don't know that it's been that good. So, yeah, I mean, but like Justin said, they had Chase Young, weren't great. So Chase Young doesn't play for them anymore, so I don't know. I don't know who that's going to be. We had a clear advantage on O-line against Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, and we threw the ball 40 times. It's the play calling. Tommy isn't telling. I mean, yeah, I don't know. That defense was good, okay? Ohio State's defense was a good team, and they had Joey Bosa, right? They had a couple of interior players as well, but that's 2015, right? Like, it has no bearing on this year's team. So, yeah, we'll get into more of Ohio State, but yeah. So we're gonna wrap it up there. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Sorry about this. Is totally my fault. I got miscommunicated with Jamie on what it was, and he's the defensive line guru, and he's the one who wrote the preview and everything. So I feel really bad that I kind of miscommunicated what time we were going to record. But thank you everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate that. Next one will definitely have Jamie on. This mistake will not happen again. But there's going to be more content that we put out later on. Like I said, that we're going to put so much more on YouTube now. I think we're really going to ramp that up, especially as the season goes on. There's going to be team previews, are going to be reaction to the fall practice and that sort of thing. We're going to have more guests. I've got another Notre Dame, former Notre Dame player that we're going to have on the show pretty soon. That's going to be really good. We're going to work on getting recruits and all those things. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. We want to get to 5,000 subscribers prior to the season starting, right? So we got 4,140. Let's try to get to 5,000 prior to the season started. That would be awesome. That would really help us out. We'd really enjoy that. And more visibility is, more good, right? Who doesn't like talking Notre Dame football? That's what we're here to do. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will talk to you very, very soon.